Hello, my name is Shay. I'm a nutritionist and an international level athlete, and today we're talking about just a general guide to basics regarding nutrition, because there's so much misinformation out there nowadays. A lot of people trying to, you could say, confuse you into buying supplements you don't need and a course you don't need. And things get overcomplicated quite easily, so I'm here to try and keep it concise. It's not as hard to understand as some people make it out to be, so let's make a start. So we're going to be talking about macronutrients, micronutrients, calories, a few misconceptions, and a little bit about meal timing as well, and a few other little bits and pieces of topics that you may have heard of and may have been confused about. So we'll make it start with macronutrients. So macronutrients and calories kind of go together. So basically you got your fats, your protein, and your carbs as your macronutrients. Okay, protein useful for, upkeeping your body, really, including muscle tissue. Your fats are good for hormonal functioning and a lot of other roles, including energy. Carbs are mostly used as an energy source, particularly around exercise, because they're quick to release and we store those as glycogen. And the reason macronutrients go together with calories is because the macronutrients are the calories. Okay, so carbs and protein are 4 calories per gram, and fat are 9. And that's literally all there is to it. Of course, if you look at those numbers there, you would see that fat's a little more calorie dense than the other two, and it's really that simple. So based on the rules that I said, you can sort of tailor what you need based on the macronutrients. Chances are you're eating fine, right? The first thing is fats, because we need them hormonally. You can't drop them to like less than 30 grams a day. You just can't afford to. Unless you're actively avoiding them, you're not going to run into that issue. As far as carbs go, ideally if you have a lot of exercise to do, if you're very active, you want to be getting enough of those in. And with protein, if you're trying to build muscle, of course you might want to aim for a higher calorie target, maybe somewhere around like 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. And the easiest way you can check any of this is just input it into, I recommend Chronometer to track your diet, and this will give you a macronutrient and micronutrient breakdown, and then you can sort of have a play around with, see what foods are doing what. I have a whole video on that, so you can check that out as well. So that's it for macronutrients. Ideally you're having, a bit of all three. You probably are, unless you're actively trying to avoid some of them. But yeah, that's all there is to it, really. Moving on to micronutrients, this means your vitamins and your minerals. So vitamins like vitamin C or your B vitamins, vitamin D, and your minerals, think metals, so like your sodium, your zinc, your iron, all that. So again, this is all built into Chronometer if you really want an in-depth analysis of what you might be missing, because there is a long list and I'm not going to cover each of them individually. I'll cover a couple of them quickly, just the ones that you might run into as deficiencies. These are the most common ones. So first up is iron. It's really common to see deficiencies in women, and we need it to maintain blood levels. It carries the actual oxygen in our blood, so you can become anemic if you don't have enough. It's best in things like meats, ideally organ meats, but also a few vegetables like spinach. Another one is vitamin D. Now this has a few roles. One of the big ones is bone health. We probably don't get enough from food. It's in some foods, it's in things like oily fish, but we get most of it by ourselves. We make it in response to UV light from the sun, which means we can run low on it in winter, but we can also store a lot if we see a lot of sun in the summer. So that's something to think about, but particularly for elderly people, we can't synthesize as much as we get older, so supplementation becomes more of a factor then. And it works together with calcium to maintain some of the bone health. The key point here is that with a varied diet, as in you're not just eating, the sum of 5 single foods, you're probably going to get micronutrients, because each food has a different micronutrient profile, and if you're having all sorts of foods, ideally whole foods, because those are going to be the most dense in micronutrients, then it's very likely that you're not running into any of these deficiencies. Now I'll quickly touch on meal timing. So a lot of people get very hung up on this. I think the two main points is if you have a very hard training session or exercise session, you'll ideally want some carbs beforehand. So Carbs are going to help give you that quick release of energy, which of course you need, and that's kind of all there is to it. As far as protein goes, ideally you just focus on the total by the end of the day. You don't have to worry too much about whether or not you're having a lot right after training. Just focus on the total intake. And another point is I wouldn't have a massive meal right before bed because it can impede a little bit on sleep quality. So those are some of the main points I think for meal timing. So now let's touch on a few topics you may have heard of. So first up, fiber. And I'm going to try and work through these somewhat concisely because there's a few of them are written down there. So basically fiber, it's in a lot of whole foods, not meats though. We need it for gut health because we have gut bacteria and they eat the fiber. We don't eat the calories from it, which makes it helpful for weight loss as well because it fills you up but you don't really get any calories for it. And gut health is important for a lot of roles, so don't cut out fiber entirely. Next up is sodium. A lot of people think sodium is terrible for your health, but that's not really the case. It's just that the people that eat highly processed foods usually eat high sodium, which means the studies come out saying, oh, look at these people, they're in poor health because they eat a lot of sodium. It's not really sodium, it's the processed foods. Sodium we actually need for blood pressure regulation, particularly during exercise. We need it for muscle contraction. We can't do without it, and I wouldn't avoid it. Next up is sugar. So sugar is a carb like any other. It's 4 calories per gram, as I said before. But it's kind of a little bit more because our gut doesn't eat it, so it all goes to us, which makes it a little bit more calorie dense. It's closer to like 5 calories if you really break it down. But either way, I wouldn't be too terrified of sugar. I think the main reason people correlate sugar to weight gain is because it's just easier to eat a lot more of sweet foods compared to maybe just regular whole foods. And so it can lead you to overeating, but it's not really the sugar itself. Although if you eat a lot of sugar, you might be running into things like diabetes, but if you exercise regularly and you don't have like a genetic predisposition, it's not the devil, so there's that. It actually makes it quite a good source before training and it won't spike your blood pressure the same way. Next up is fat types. This I've heard can confuse some people. The main two to break down is your unsaturated and your saturated. So saturated is generally the worst one. There's also trans fat, but that's kind of banned now because it's kind of poison. But basically saturated fat, think room temperature. At room temperature it'll be solid, so butter, so animal fat. If you have too much of this, you might run into some other implications. But of course that doesn't make meat bad because you're also getting things like protein and micronutrients from it. And the opposite is the unsaturated fat, so liquid at room temperature. So think olive oil. They are unsaturated, but they're not really ideal for inflammatory markers, particularly when they're heated to high temperatures. So I would say stick to olive oil. That would be probably the healthiest fat you could recommend to someone. But unsaturated fats are also in nuts, which makes them a good food choice too. But overall, I wouldn't be too scared of fat. It's heavily marketed as like, oh, this product is low in fat, but if it's, you know, if something's high in fat and it's unsaturated fat, it's absolutely good. Like, don't worry about it. Like, who said peanuts are bad, right? So that's most of the tricky topics I wanted to cover. And lastly, I'll just talk about what makes a diet good, right? So ideally it's fitting your needs depending on whatever exercise or lifestyle you lead. And ideally it is comprised of mostly whole foods because these are going to be the most micronutrient dense. Of course you can meet your micronutrient demands with some processed foods, but if you're eating mostly whole food and you're checking the boxes for the micronutrients that you need, you know, you can have a bit of ice cream, man. You don't have to you don't have to overly restrict yourself because sometimes it's not sustainable for people. And you know, do whatever makes you feel best based on this advice. So that's all from me today. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.